Okay, we'll get started. Welcome to our witnesses to the Standing Committee on Canadian Heritage and our study of Canada's 150th anniversary. We have committee members, a very distinguished panel with us today with a great deal of experience and expertise on the subject that we are studying. So welcome to all of our witnesses. We have Mr. Peter Ackroyd, who's with us today. He was the Public Relations Director of the Canadian Centennial Commission from 1963 to 1967. He's held various positions within the Federal Public Service, including Assistant Secretary to the Cabinet for the Privy Council and Associate Deputy Minister for Transport Canada. He's also, in 1992, published the book, The Anniversary Compulsion, Canada's Centennial Celebrations, a Model Mega Anniversary. So welcome to you, Mr. Ackroyd. And Mr. Ackroyd, some of you may know his son, Mr. Dan Ackroyd, who is with us today. I offered him the opportunity to sit at the table, but that would probably just lead to questions that were completely off topic. So welcome to you as well, sir. We also have Mr. Peter McLeod from Mass LBP. In March 2010, Mass LBP partnered with the Institute of Public Administration of Canada to hold the 150 Canada Conference. Public servants, business leaders, academics, artists assembled at the National Arts Centre in Ottawa to reflect on Canada's 150th anniversary, so very relevant to our study today. And we also have Colin Jackson from Imagination 150. Imagination 150 is a group of Albertans who are brainstorming ideas on how to celebrate Canada's 150th anniversary in 2017. So welcome to our three panelists. You each will be given 10 minutes for opening comments, and then we'll have an opportunity for individuals to question, committee members to ask questions of you. So we will start then with Mr. Peter Ackroyd. The floor is yours.
Is that 10 minutes each or 10 minutes for the three of us?
10 minutes each.
Thank you.
But we're not too strict on that.
A word about my mindy here, my son Dan there. He wears the Order of Canada insignia, you'll notice. And he's also got the doctorate from Carleton University. And when you get Danny in a room, you've got a Ghostbuster, a Blues Brother, and a Conehead. I've just got a few general remarks here that are matters of principle rather than detail, but I think they probably will be useful to you. I hope so. First of all, there was no official history written about 1967. Apart from the anniversary compulsion. Now, I have copies of the book here for anybody who would care to take one. It's still in print. And
after you've done that, I'll pass them up to everybody in the room. We have enough for everyone.
Okay. It was the only chronicle of the centennial in 1967 that was written, oddly enough. And I think that's a clue, perhaps, to the new group that's going to take over the heritage aspects, and you better assign somebody to write the history, because it's a shame to have it lost, as it was in the case of 1967. There was also no basic kinds of oh no, wait a minute, I'm mixed up here. I just want to say that there are two basic kinds of circumstances which bring about the knee-jerk reaction to celebrate. The calendric date, repetitive calendric dates is one of them, and just think birthday when you think of that rubric. The second is the perceived milestone, which has particular interest. And if it's divisible by 5, then that makes it important. Like 2016 is ho-hum. 2018 is too late. So it's odd, and I'll leave that mystery with you. why divisible by 5, and why does that make it important? I have not yet satisfied myself about that. And the issue also is not about nationalism. Now, there's a very fine distinction between nationalism and patriotism. And I stand or sit challenged on that, but I do believe that nationalism has a different connotation, and it's really related to comparisons of countries and cultures and their particular attributes and history, whereas patriotism is something finer, something more personal. And just think, never breathes a soul so dead who never to himself has said, "This is my home, my native land." 2017 is the stuff of patriotism. My home, my native land. It's fundamental in planning and thinking about it to make that distinction between nationalism and patriotism, and I give it to you as a philosophical matter for you to consider in your planning. Following 1967, there was no quantitative or qualitative analysis of what went on. The programs just occurred, and that was that. And to this day, except for a few MA and PhD theses that exist, there is still no qualitative or quantitative analysis of what happened. Now, all of the archives of the Centennial Commission, and it was my responsibility to see that this took place, were deposited in the National Archives of Canada, and there's eight sort of stacks down the street here of the National Archives, right down to the level of the Ottawa River, and in those are 100 meters, I believe it is, of files. Every scrap of paper we had are all there. So there's no dearth of material to really understand what happened in some of these programs and whether they succeeded or not. And that's a great bonus to everybody who's planning for Canada 150. The material is all there and to be used. Now, in my own analysis in the book, The Anniversary Compulsion, I tried to concentrate on the how of the compulsion, and the result is encapsulated in what I call the anniversary axiomatique. It's me having looked at all the programs and then refining them down to what they were all about, and then backing up and saying, okay, now if we want to do this again, what would be some rules to follow? And the anniversary axiomatique are the 10 precepts that I come up with for a successful anniversary. And I commend them to you because I do believe they have some substance of value. I'd like to pay tribute to Peter MacLeod here on my right and the Institute of Public Administration for hosting the first conference on the subject area in March 2010. Well, I guess that's all I want to say in terms of general remarks, and be happy, of course, to answer questions later on. And I just would hold up a copy of the Anniversary Compulsion and say, I don't need to say any more. It's all in the book.
Well, thank you, sir. We will now move on to Peter MacLeod.
Vraiment, c'est un grand plaisir de...
It's a great pleasure to join with you this morning to talk about our 150th anniversary.
Occasions to come before a parliamentary committee to talk about something like Canada's sesquicentennial in 2017. It is, of course, a special pleasure to see Peter Ackroyd again, and as well Colin Jackson, Peter spoke with almost 20 distinguished Canadians at this conference that we held at the National Arts Centre, and there are actually videos which are available. Everyone from Ruck Carrier to Beverly McLaughlin to Peter Ackroyd and more are there, reflecting on what they felt was the significance of 1967 and the import of marking our sesquicentennial in a suitable fashion. So I recommend that to you. I guess I'm here really to talk about three things today, to try and relay to you a little bit about what happened at that conference, to also talk about some of the history surrounding 1967, which is covered so ably in Peter's book, but also in Helen Davies' research, and I understand that the committee met with Helen last week. I brought along copies of her dissertation. It was a funny thing when we were preparing to do some research for our conference. We found her doctoral dissertation in the musty archives of the University of Winnipeg. And I assure you, it's a very pleasant thing for any former PhD student to get a phone call out of the blue announcing not only interest in someone's dissertation, but a desire to publish it as well. And the reason we did that is exactly because, as Peter has explained, there really are too few materials concerning what happened in what was, I think everyone can agree, a landmark year for this country. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the history there, and then catch you up perhaps on some of the initiatives that have begun since the conference. Well, maybe I'll start actually with some of the people who were involved. I suspect Helen has covered some of the details concerning the commission that was set up. My interest is really in the sesquicentennial as an exercise in public imagination. That's also what we titled the report that came out of the conference. You know, when you think about 67, and of course I get all of this secondhand, right, from my parents and from their friends and neighbors, and it's striking as well that you really have three generations sitting at the table today, each with their own relationship to the centennial and the sesquicentennial. You know, it served as a kind of high watermark for a lot of public and political energy in this country. If you just think back to the history of the 1960s, a history shared by both conservative and liberal governments, of course, we began in 1960 with Diefenbaker's Bill of Rights. In 61, the kind of wave of technological change was sweeping across the country. The Prime Minister placed the first transatlantic phone call to the Queen. We, only a year later, launched a satellite into space. We were the third country to do so. In 64, social insurance cards were issued for the first time. In 65, we had a new flag. Toronto built a new city hall. In 66, the CBC flipped the switch on color broadcasting. We got the Canada Pension Plan. We built the Bloor-Danforth line across Toronto. Montreal got Metro, and Canadians got Medicare. But we're not done yet, because in 1967, of course, the centennial year, we had a new anthem. We built a national library. We awarded the first Orders of Canada, and we attended one of the world's great fairs, Expo, in Montreal. And only 1,000 people came to see 8 acts that made up the first Caravana Festival in Toronto. And of course, the political record continues from there. But it's important to note that it wasn't just a party, that there was, my reading, a real sense of momentum about Canada becoming a modern, dynamic country that was starting to articulate for itself a different narrative. And I'll just get into a little bit about that. You know, as a country, we started and ended the decade in very different places. It was an era of metamorphosis and reinvention. Little of this was because of the centennial. Of course, it's not a causal relationship. But what centennial did was establish a milestone, a goalpost. It was powerful because it focused everyone's attention on 3 key questions. Where are we? Who are we? And just where are we going? And in this way, I think centennial was a useful device. It had a political effect. It was catalytic because it gave us a public occasion to ask these questions in an open and free way, outside of the sort of public crisis that normally spurs these debates about major change. Instead, the spirit of Centennial allowed us to propose some new ideas about how, as a society, we could live together. Or at least I think this is what two people, Roby Kidd and Frida Walden, may have in mind. And so if you get the idea to build any statues to people for our sesquicentennial, I think both Roby Kidd and Frida Walden would probably be excellent candidates, because they probably did more to shape the spirit of Centennial than anyone else in Canada, although I'm sure they'd refuse the credit. You see, Roby, many of you may be familiar with his son, Bruce Kidd, who was for many years Dean of Athletics at U of T, and himself an Olympic athlete. His father was the first Canadian to get a PhD in adult education. He was what you might call a proto-social entrepreneur. And Frida Walden, well, she ran the Hamilton Public Library and was also the head of the Canadian Librarians Association, and saw firsthand the transformative power of literacy and education. Kidd and Walden each understood the value of what today we might call lifelong self-directed learning. And this is the connection I'd really like to make for the committee today, is the Centennial as an opportunity for learning. And as soon as you talk about learning or pedagogy, of course, immediately you start thinking, well, that doesn't sound like so much fun. That doesn't sound like a great party. But in fact, it was the spark that I would argue made Centennial as memorable as in fact it was. They shared the belief that a good society is one that encourages curiosity, self-discovery, and improvement. And together they were among the first people to recognize the opportunity that a Canadian centennial might contain. And I believe that in doing so, they helped to set the stage for what would follow. 10 years before the centennial, in 1957, they organized a conference that drew together 32 different organizations, like the YMCAs and community foundations, teachers groups and librarians. And a year later they met again, and soon they would create the Centenary, the Canadian Centenary Council. It was a voluntary organization whose purpose was to get people thinking about 1967 and to press the government to get moving. Because it wasn't government that led the way to 1967, it really was citizens like Roby and Frida. And they managed to embed this idea that Centennial didn't belong to the government, it belonged to Canadians, and it would be up to Canadians to decide just how they intended to celebrate. Encouraging curiosity, self-discovery, and improvement was what they hoped Centennial would help to do. They envisioned a centennial that would be about the excitement of learning. It would be about learning about oneself, one's neighbors, and one's country. And you could do this without ever taking out a textbook. And what's so extraordinary is that when Canadians by the millions took up this invitation, exceeding anyone's expectations in Ottawa, and staged thousands of community events and initiatives, they began to see for themselves that despite their differences from one region to the next, what they shared was this desire to learn and to celebrate. And for Canadians in 1967, it didn't matter if your way of celebrating was to build a UFO pad in St. Paul, Alberta, just in case, to stage a bathtub race in Nanaimo, BC, to launch a Caribbean festival in Toronto, or to host a historic reenactment in PEI. The point was the people were taking charge. They were spontaneously, joyously, mixing and burning their own centennials clear across the country. And the government encouraged them in some very interesting ways. I've submitted to each of you color copies that I direct your attention to. You know, in the 1960s, one of the more notorious publications was a book by Abby Hoffman, provocatively called Steal This Book. Well, the federal government, I suspect with Mr. Ackroyd's assistance, placed an ad in major publications. It looks like this. And the top line of it is, take this centennial symbol, put it on a banner, use it on your products and in your advertising, engrave it on your stationery, paint it on your vehicles, wear it on your lapel, display it on cartons, stick it on your pay envelopes, stencil it on your coffee cups, carry it, fly it, but above all, use it. And there was a coupon that you would send into Ottawa, and they would send you back photo-ready artwork. And I like to joke, just try that with the Olympic rings, right? This is before open source, right? This is a government trusting the citizenry to make use of a federal symbol which would visually create some constancy, right? Some consistency across all of these different initiatives. So we weren't particularly fussed what you were doing. We were concerned that you were doing it, and we wanted to figure out a subtle but important way to create some connective tissue across these initiatives. Now, I talked a lot about the importance of Roby and Frida and the emphasis on learning. But when you think about it, what were some of the major events? It was the Canadian train that traveled from one end of the country to the other, that launched a kind of new museology that created opportunities for another generation of curators and theater directors to stage their own history of the country. If you went to Expo, it was called Man and His World, which may seem for obvious reasons a little dated. But it really was about learning. It was about man and technology, man and nature, man and society, and learning about the ways in which our world was changing. And I put it to you that in the course of the past 40-odd years, society, of course, has changed dramatically, and we need to think as much again about where we are and who we are and where we want to go. This ad here, what is Centennial? This is a fabulous government advertisement. I hope you'll agree. I won't read it all. It says at the end, it's a time to reflect on past achievements of our growth into a modern, dynamic country and to look ahead to a future of prosperity and greatness. You have to love the confidence of the 1960s, too. They did modernism well. What are you planning for Centennial? So it's not saying here's a schedule of events that you should come to, but what are you going to do to make this a major occasion? The last ad I want to show you, and then I'll start to wrap up, mindful of the time. This was the final ad that the government took out, which really commemorated what they had accomplished, and so it's covered in memorabilia. And again, I'll only read out the last paragraph. It's very striking because I think any other country in the world would have put it a little differently. It says, not in 1967 we celebrated ourselves as a nation. It says in 1967 we learned a lot about ourselves as a nation, and let's not stop now. Let's enjoy this new knowledge of ourselves and make every year to come one of excitement and discovery. We'll just call it 1968, Centennial +1, and keep on going. Well, for me, this isn't an exercise in Canadian boosterism. It's not an exercise in nostalgia. I think the work that was done around the Centennial is really instructive, because I think the ethos of it is actually as relevant today as it was then. How do we use 2017 as an opportunity to challenge Canadians to think a little bit more deeply about the kind of society we want to live in and how this country has changed? You know, our first 100 years was defined by geography. But I think since 1967, geography has given way to demography. And by the time we reach 2017, 1/3 of this country will have been born abroad. It's time we take this opportunity to have a good conversation about who we are and where we're going. I'm probably mindful of the time, but that's very gracious. I'll leave it there, and maybe in questions can pick up about the conference and some of the things that are happening in the country already.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. McLeod. And now finally, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you so very much. We in Calgary wish to influence the spirit of 2017 by example, by giving gifts to Canada. What we are is a group of people that are completely unauthorized by anybody other than ourselves. There's a couple of us who are retired and are able to give 2 or 3 days a week. There's others who are still in business and give less time, but still significantly. We've raised some money, and we have an office courtesy of the Chamber of Commerce. We have a part-time staff. We have growing relationships and the beginning of what we think will be examples, both good and unsuccessful, for the rest of the country, should people wish to build off of them. We also, as I say, want to give gifts. The framing we're proposing, at least for ourselves, and we hope that it will be picked up in some version nationally, for 2017 is it's Canada's birthday. We will all be there. What gifts are we bringing? What does the nation need? So it's about that outward view of it's our opportunity to offer leadership from wherever we are, whomever we are, to the nation. That means there'll be all kinds of projects and all kinds of perspectives and points of view, but that's what we hope to influence, is that spirit. I think it's self-evident that we, as human beings, care about that which we help create. And we had an unfortunate example of the reverse, to my mind at least, in Alberta's centenary a few years ago. That anniversary was very much top-down. The province, the provincial government, essentially threw a party and invited the citizens. And it was flat. It was small. It was not generative, and it's really not remembered. I should just pause for a second and say that that's the only example I know of Alberta ever getting it wrong in public policy. But I thought I'd, allow at least, a moment of humility. Now, so having learned from and being tangentially involved in that centenary, I and others are even more convinced that this needs to be something which activates citizens broadly and activates what might be unrealized leadership in the country. And I can come back to that. So we have this small organization. We have growing relationships, and I'll give you an example or some examples of some of those relationships. We want to understand better as a city where we've come from since 1967, where we are now, and where we aspire to go. And we intend to do that not simply by phone surveys, but through conversation, through living research. And the University of Calgary is working with us to undertake that. We have a website, and it really at the moment is very, very rudimentary. It allows people to post their wish for Canada, but it isn't iterative. It doesn't do what the website will eventually do, which is to be an aggregator where people can post what they're doing, connect with somebody doing something similar elsewhere in the nation, be encouraged, learn from each other. Well, to get to that next level of website, we're in close conversation with one of the major newspaper chains. The deal being, if they're prepared, and they are so far, to do this as a gift, not as a proprietary project of their own, but rather it's their gift to Canada, then that's in the spirit of what we're speaking to. There's all kinds of small projects beginning to be talked about. This one actually is not Calgary, but I was in conversation 2 days ago with a high school teacher from Quebec, and he was observing that the students coming in now will be graduating in 2017, and he is dead keen on how he can, with his colleagues, put together an arc for those students so that when they graduate in 2017, there's something special about their connection to sesquicentennial, to Canada, something particular about how they are engaged. Now, again, it's very early. It's unclear yet what that will be, but it's that thinking about here's an opportunity. I was speaking about other forms of leadership. And again, when I speak to these different organizations or individuals, I'm in no way committing them. We're in conversations. It's very early days. But the Canadian Chambers of Commerce and the Chambers of Commerce in their various locales, ours in Calgary already is, they can step forward to offer a leadership role in thinking through what kind of community, municipality, city, province, country we wish to have. Do well for the Chamber by doing good for others. There's various faith communities. I'm in conversation with Cardis and with some Ismaili associations, and there's many others too, that have networks across the country that have a care for who we're becoming from a faith perspective and could be offering greater leadership. There's older organizations who are perhaps renewing themselves, one example being 4-H, and their early conversation, and again, I'm not committing them, but just to note it, is that perhaps they could organize the nation's biggest student exchange, all the grade 9s in the country going and living somewhere else. Or perhaps we can activate the tourism commissions to mediate the biggest home exchange, not home invasion, home exchange in the country. And, you know, for younger people, perhaps it could be couch surfing. But to really put out that in 2017, how about you go and visit some part of the nation you've never been to before, and do so according to your means. So all kinds of alliances that are possible. I believe that the federal government can play a number of useful roles. One of them is as an information source, as an accumulator of ideas and opportunities. Another one is to facilitate the CRA regulations so that when, if there are chapters of Imagination 150 or whatever their formation might be, pop up in different cities, they can get to a place where they can offer tax receipts more quickly. That can be a very sticky process. I'm sure there'll be thousands of projects which are most appropriate for some kind of public money. In our case, we do not want it. We don't want it for a couple of reasons. One of them is we really believe in this notion of this is an opportunity to animate citizens outside of government, not in opposition, but outside of government. And part of it is that we hope to reframe some of the political conversation we have now toward not just what is government going to do for me and will you fix my pothole or repair my tax bill, but rather that we as citizens more frequently ask the question, what can we, Madam Mayor, Mr. MP, do to facilitate you being the best public policy maker that's possible for all of us? In other words, try and turn that conversation from a service, government as a service, to government as ours. So if we're going to be part of that advocacy, then we shouldn't be recipients of public money. But there's all kinds of projects, from war memorials to field houses, to concert halls, to student exchanges, which would be very appropriate for consideration in that regard. Other networks that I think might be activatable are the Orders of Canada. We've had conversation with a number of Orders of Canada recipients, and I think they will all tell you that they, of course, are deeply honored to be recognized, but nothing is ever asked of them once they've been recognized. And this may be a very appropriate way of engaging Orders of Canada. Again, I've had some conversations with past Governors General and with current Lieutenants Governor. There's roles that could be played there in their unique position within our structure, our governance. And there's much more, but I thought that would be at least the beginning. So thank you so much for inviting me here, and it's just a pleasure to be with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you to our panel, Mr. Ackroyd, Mr. McLeod, Mr. Jackson. Very informative presentations. Now, at this point, we move to our question and answer. And just so you know, each member that asks a question, the first round that we go around is 7 minutes. So there's 7 minutes for the question and answer and exchange. Then we move our way around the table. So we're starting off with Mr. Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. The more I hear about 2017, the more excited I get. And I was a grade 2 student in Toronto in 1967, and I vaguely remember, and I remember it was an exciting time. I was too young really to appreciate what was happening at the time, but I'm delighted that we have our witnesses here today, and especially you, Mr. Ackroyd, who was so intimately involved in those 1967 celebrations. And I'm looking forward to reading your book. Mr. Ackroyd, I think we really want to take advantage of having you here today. Maybe you can give us just a little snippet of some of the highlights that you remember, and hopefully all of us will read your book so that the committee members can benefit from your experience. So I'll turn it over to you, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about the highlights that you remember that we will read about in your book.
You've opened up the whole field by opening the gate, and I can't swing on the gate back and forth. I have to get into the field, and it's too big a field. I don't know that I can answer your question as satisfactorily. I had something however, that I didn't say when my opening remarks that maybe don't even touch it, but the members of Parliament were not involved in the proceedings of the centennial very much, except we had these little pins that we gave out to people on the cards and printed them by the millions, and you heard about them in this ad. Judy LaMarche was the minister responsible for Centennial Commission, and she said, well, the best conduit for giving things out to the public are the members of Parliament. And imagine, we bureaucrats didn't even stop to think and realize how fundamental that is, and of course that was the answer. So by the millions, we brought the boxes up to the House of Commons here, and they all disappeared and ended up in constituencies all over Canada, distributed by who? The members of Parliament. And so that's just a little kind of, I don't know what facts, I suppose you'd say, to encourage you to be involved from the beginning.
In terms of setting up a potential commission, because you were obviously intimately involved in that, is that something that the government should consider doing? I know that it's only 2011 right now, and most Canadians are not focused on 2017 yet, but I think it's our responsibility, and that's why this committee is undertaking this study to look ahead. So maybe you can tell us whether you think setting up a commission might be a good idea and what it might do. And maybe to Mr. McLeod, you talked a little bit about some things that are already going on. Maybe you can tell us some things that are happening already.
Thank you.
Okay.
Why don't I just say a little bit of, I would say, yes, the government should set up a commission, and in short order, too. I mean, if you take the centennial as a significant precedent, the commission was created in 1962. As you know, if we want to, build anything of any significance, that requires planning, and the time it takes these days to get an environmental assessment, to get all the contracts lined up, it takes several years to build anything. So even though it does seem to most Canadians as though we're still a ways away from 2017, in fact, in planning terms, it's practically tomorrow. So we do need to get moving. And I understand with the importance of commemorating the Jubilee in 1812, there's some other important milestones, and these are getting maybe a little backed up in the system. But let's not miss this opportunity by playing out the clock on it. And to that end, I think the provinces have each begun to begin their own conversations internally about what they can do to mark the sesquicentennial. Most significantly, it's PEI that is first out of the gate, and I should commend to you the work of David McKenzie, who was recently appointed the CEO of PEI 2014. And why 2014? Well, of course, it was when the Fathers of Confederation met in PEI, and their big theme is the idea of the Great Dream. We had a great dream on that island then, and it led to Canada. So they're going to spend 2014 celebrating that meeting, and in time, helping Canadians to, create an on-ramp to 2017. So they're going to have two conferences, one in December for islanders to have a big think about what needs to happen, and then they're going to invite prominent Canadians, leading organizations from coast to coast to the island in probably February or March of next year for another big think about what the country should do to mark the occasion. So you can look to the island for some leadership on this issue.
I speak about this often because only 3 out of 10 provinces in Canada require a student to have a history course to pass, to graduate from high school. And from my recollections of 1967, that it was a real opportunity to focus on our history. How might we work on helping to educate Canadians, and obviously the celebrations surrounding the War of 1812 next year and over the next couple of years is a great opportunity. How might we use 2017 and Canada 150 to really celebrate our history, and in terms of the process that we're going through now, how may we involve Canadians in that consultation process?
Well, I think it's two things. I mean, it's about looking back and it's also about looking forwards, and we should use 2017 as a pivot point to look in maybe both directions at the same time. I certainly take your point and concern that young Canadians probably don't know enough about the history of the country. You know, obviously, because of constitutional concerns, it's not in the federal government's remit to be able to change instruction at the provincial level concerning history, but I think governments at all levels since the 60s have really gotten out of the public learning business. And it's not just in our schools, of course, that states seek to educate their citizens. I've already pointed to Expo as one instance where there was a large pedagogic program at work there. Even funny things like Ontario Place that opened in the 70s. You know, that wasn't built as a music venue and a water slide. That was built as a place to celebrate advances in Ontario society so that you could go and see new technologies and you could learn more about the province. So I think a big conversation needs to happen amongst, all of the obvious groups, whether it's the librarians again, whether it's the educators, whether it's the Canadian Association of Museums and so on. But we need to bring them together now and put the challenge to them to say it's a priority for us that Canadians know more about their country. It's a priority for us that Canadians are thinking ahead. So tell us what you got. What would be the most creative, persuasive, compelling opportunities given 5 years to make a real go of this thing? I don't think there'll be any shortage of ideas. There certainly weren't when we brought people together at the National Arts Centre. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here today. It's wonderful to have you, and in particular, it's a real gift for us to have someone like Mr. Ackroyd with the institutional memory of the organizing of the centenary. And while it is true that, and surprising that we don't have the qualitative and the quantitative documentation about what we did right other than this, which we're really thankful for, we have a lot of anecdotal evidence that we did something right. And what I wanted to ask all of you is, that was 1967. What do you think have been the biggest? What's the biggest change that you think we're living through right now compared to 1967? Mr. Ackroyd, would you care to answer that?
Well, I think it's in the field of technology and communications. The whole question about what we are calling social media. Anybody can talk to anybody else in the world now on the internet and online, and it's simply stupendous advance in communication and relationships of individuals with each other. I'd say it's in that realm that things have changed, and it's in that realm that we should be looking to take advantage of that particular fact with the impetus of 2017 behind it. That would be my response.
Okay, thank you. And I'm wondering, Mr. Ackroyd, were you consulted by the federal government when the government was planning the 125th anniversary? Did they
which anniversary?
Well, the 125th.
125.
No.
Okay. Okay.
I wasn't. I don't recall.
Okay.
I wasn't involved.
You weren't involved in that.
And I don't know if the government wasn't.
Okay.
You know, that it's worth responding to you as members of Parliament that in 1967 started in the Prime Minister's office, in Mr. Pearson's office. And he had a private secretary named Jack Hodgson, and Jack Hodgson was a distinguished naval officer in the war and was an executive of Central Mortgage and Housing Corporation, and he handed Jack Hodgson this responsibility to do something about 1967. And it all started with one man, and so he did some consultation, and I believe that somewhere along the line it had to start in the House of Commons here, because that's where legislation starts. And I remember when the draft bill went to the Department of Justice, And I was around the Privy Council office at the time. I remember the draft bill that was all laid out there. Somebody did all the work, and I don't know how involved the members of Parliament really were, but had there been a committee like this, wow, they'd have sure had lots of input.
Yeah. I'm wondering, though, about the commission itself, and I know it's in here, but how independent was the commission? How was it structured?
How independent was what?
How independent was the Centenary Commission?
Centennial Commission? Well, of course, it was established by statute to start with, and the Centennial Act is quite clear about what its purpose was. And the members of the commission were well chosen from across the country to represent a broad spectrum of Canada. That didn't work very well, and we can talk about that a bit because it's very important to see why didn't it work. And the members of the executive committee were very, very diligent, and they met 52 times during this 1967 and made the executive decisions, and very, very responsibly, I would say.
Thank you. Mr. Jackson, you refer to Alberta's 100th anniversary and you say that it fell flat. And the reason you give is that it was top-down. Now, that may well be a reason, but I would like to hear if there were other reasons that you could think of that it fell flat.
Well, another way into that same thought, I think, is that I think as human beings we care about that which we help create. And if it's simply a cocktail party, I'll come and we'll have a conversation. But if it's a potluck, we're into a much more intimate dynamic. So in Alberta, there were some events that traveled the province, but government would propose there would be very little disposition by private sector or by not-for-profit or cultural sector. There was very little pickup.
What you're saying is there wasn't a lot of consultation with the broader society in advance?
I think there was consultation, but the feel of it was the Premier, the government of the day are throwing a party and we're invited, rather than the Premier and the government of the day are throwing out a challenge. How are we going to together celebrate the very important anniversary of our province?
Okay.
Nothing was legacy out of it. Mr. Cash, there was no, I mean, it's like, I suppose, Canada's 125th. That there was so little done with it.
Right. Well, 1967 was a period in our history where, among other things, we were enjoying some of the greatest equality of income in our history. At that point, about let's see, between the World War II and 1977, the income share of the richest 1% dropped from, or the richest dropped from 14% of total income to just under 8%. By 2007, the richest share of total income had doubled. So that's a fundamental shift in our economy and consequently in our society. And I wonder if anyone would like to answer the question, how important is that income gap difference between 1967 and today? How important is that to the pickup and the take-up that we may that we're trying to create here around the 150th?
I think you're going to get a from a downtown Toronto to a Calgarian. There's going to be somewhat different angles
about the import of the income gap.
No, I think it is a very important issue. How we might address it, there may be some difference, but I think to your point about education, Peter.
Let me just offer a very brief response. I don't actually think it's for any of us at this end of the table to offer an opinion on that. It really is for Canadians to decide, and I think that's why an occasion like a sesquicentennial major milestone can be such an important opportunity to take stock of where we are. In response to Mr. Brown's question about how do you consult with Canadians, you don't just go and ask them what they want. You have to give them context to compare and contrast where we are today to where we've come from, to what some scenarios for our future might look like. And certainly, given that Canada is among OECD countries becoming more unequal faster than all but Germany, it's probably an important context in which to situate this discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. Mr. Sims.
First of all, thanks for coming. I'm extremely impressed with the material that's put in front of me. Excuse me, and I'll tell you why. The spirit that was there in the late 1960s was something I was fascinated in, because when I see it on TV and a reflection of it, there's a spirit there that I think sparked a lot of all things Canadiana for the next 10, 15, 20 years at least, if not more. And when I see the material that comes from that year, I'm impressed at how it was handled. And the enthusiasm in 1960s, obviously the enthusiasm that was sparked from the year 1949 when Newfoundland joined Canada. Right? I may call for a vote on that pretty soon. So anyway, but what I do like about this is that there's this implicit challenge to ask people to become a Canadian, to challenge people to say, to realize what you already know. And we had a similar experience. In 1997 in Newfoundland, we celebrated our 500 year of existence when John Cabot discovered Newfoundland. And in it, during that celebration, we realized what kind of a history we had. And the legacy was within the children of the schools, who now know far more about all things about Newfoundland and Labrador than we did growing up in the 1980s. But I do like this because it says, carry it, fly it, but above all, just use it. And in the book, because I haven't read your book, but I thank you again for your book, there's a great ad here that says, what can I do for Centennial? And to suggest, fly my flag, have a family reunion. What can I do for Centennial? Paint my house, support local projects. So there's that impetus for people to actually do something, which I think, Mr. Jackson, is what you were alluding to, about giving back to the country, but at the same time receiving. But one thing I do recall about Centennial, and it sticks in my memory over the years, and that is we have about 7 or 8 Newfoundlanders playing in the NHL, one of which won the Stanley Cup last year. They learned how to play hockey in the smallest of towns in arenas built in 1967. And so the legacy, there's no limit to it. But when you were deciding what to construct in these communities, and you mentioned like a UFO landing, there's a small town in my riding, the name of the town is Happy Adventure. I kid you not. That's a good place to have a UFO landing, really. But when you were deciding how to use these legacy projects, like arenas, like structures that kids can use, how did you start? Like, where did you say, are we going to build arenas? We're going to build town halls? What was the genesis of that?
It was a cost-sharing program with the 3 levels of government. The federal government, by statute, said that they would put up $1 if the province put up $1, and then the municipalities could put up $1 or more, but the aggregate funds would be used to build centennial projects, and preferably projects of a lasting value and nature. And that was sort of the key words. And that's where you see there's an analysis in my book there. First of all, the statistical tables that show all of the projects all across the country, what kinds they were, and they reflected the ethos of the province in every case. It's really quite remarkable. And the program was going so well that it was Maurice Lamontagne at the time who was minister, not Julie LaMarche. Lamontagne said, well, wait a minute, all these municipalities are getting all of these projects. I think we should have a major project in each province, and paid fully by the federal government, $25 million each. And that's where some of the great big projects that occurred in the 2 Jubilee projects in Alberta are examples. They're paid for totally by centennial grants. So it was kind of the whim of the minister at the time, and it was accepted.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because the problem with these cost-shared programs in today's context is that a lot of these smaller communities do not have the capacity to go to the level that they want to go. And, you know, I'm not turning this into a rural-urban battle here, but in the 500 celebrations, we built a large actual replica of the ship that John Cabot was in. Sorry, Giovanni Caboto, actually, he was Italian. So, you know, this huge ship that's still there. Now, it's in trouble. It needs money. We have a campaign called Save the Matthew. This is the type of thing that, you know, to celebrate what is distinctive to one part of the country is also a celebration of Canada's, and you know, sesquicentennial. You should get the Order of Canada if you can pronounce that without pausing, quite frankly. Sesquicentennial, thank you. To celebrate this, was there all, I think you mentioned that there were distinctive to a province, like a project like that. Does that make sense? Yeah, I'm wondering if there's a question myself. The question is that some of these projects are very distinctive to one particular area.
Oh, yes.
Like the replica of the ship that discovered Newfoundland. When you were doing this 1967 celebration, were there projects like that?
Oh, yes, there were.
Okay.
One of the problems with capital projects of that nature is that there's no money made for maintenance in perpetuity, and that becomes a burden.
You know, each province was given one major gift, and so that's how Alberta got the archive, or Ontario got the archives, and Alberta got a performing arts centre, and so there was one big flagship build, and then there were all the municipal projects.
That's what you alluded to as one big project that was fully funded by the federal government?
Yes.
Interesting.
I would suggest that just doing an inventory of every centennial and memorial project in this country would be a very good place to start, because how many kids go to a centennial school or play hockey in a centennial rink or memorial arena, or, you know, kick around a ball in a centennial park? So part of the infrastructure question about 2017 is just taking stock of the previous legacies, thinking about whether they can be rehabilitated or improved, and then thinking about the sort of infrastructure that's appropriate to 21st century Canada as well. But this is where, you know, having the frank conversation about where we are is important. Part of the reason that build-out happened is because the Royal Bank of Canada issued a newsletter in 1958 that pointed to Centennial as an opportunity to deal with, and I love this phrase, the cultural deficits in this country. And they said, we need houses replacing slums. We need places for the performance of the arts and the elevation of our society. And it's very strong language where they challenged government to embark on this program. And their gift to the country, RBC, was something you'll find in the library here called the Conspectus of Canada. And what do bankers do well? They count things. So they counted everything in the country, from the number of boxcars we had on the rails to the number of kids we had in schools. So the decisions that were made around Centennial were evidence-based in that way. It was based on understanding where we were as a country and responding to those needs.
Can I final comment?
Well, you're at 8.5 minutes, so we've got other comments.
What are you planning for Centennial? That's a fantastic place. That's a fantastic thing to do. That was a great idea.
Thank you. A little extra comment. Mr. Sims. Okay, Mr. Armstrong.
I feel bad for Mr. Sims because I think we could have these witnesses for 2 or 3 days on this committee. First of all, I want to thank you all for being here, and we're still at the beginning of the study, and I think we have some themes starting to emerge, but I think there's so much to learn. And every time we have a new witness come in, we kind of go down a different path and a different avenue, and it's been very productive so far. One of the things I think we need to have as a recommendation coming out of this committee, and Mr. Ackroyd, you could probably comment on this. I think it's so valuable to have a resource like yourself here who actually was in the part of the planning. And I think it would be very important for us to make sure that as we go through this process, we actually have a process so that we can have some plans and some records when we go and plan the 2067 200th anniversary of Canada. Because I find this very valuable. So I think as we go forward, we actually should have that as a component of our plan for this sesquicentennial. I don't know if I can do it in Canada or not, but we also should have a plan for the next one, because I think this is a very valuable thing. So, Mr. Ackroyd, I really appreciate you for being here, because it's providing us a very valuable resource. One of the things you've put in your book is what I call a 10-point plan. You called it the anniversary axiomatique. And I think it gives us a good guideline or a place to start when we plan, because it provides what was best of the centennial, in my opinion, from reading through it. I'm going to talk about two of those points, and I'm going to get you to comment if you could. The first one, you talk about accentuating unifying elements, symbols, songs, and all things that are held in common that have a bonding potential for the country. And so far in our study, we have witnessed people talking about the passport. Several witnesses have mentioned this passport that people were given. We've also talked a bit about the song, the Bobby Grimby song. And now what we've had brought to us today by Mr. McLeod is the symbol, the actual symbol and the logo of the centennial. How important do you think these unifying symbols are, and do you think that's a good place for us to sort of start as far as the public relations campaign to build up energy towards the sesquicentennial?
I've got a chapter in there on symbols and how this centennial symbol was chosen, and the centennial song, Canada, we love thee. That's a kind of an anthem which is still valuable, and still owned by the government of Canada. I believe the patent on it has not expired. And extremely important to have symbols that people can focus on and that just by their definition join us all together. Extremely important, very, very valuable. And we had to have a symbol for the centennial, of course. Well, it was my responsibility to get that symbol, and that forms a very lively chapter in the book, how that happened, because we were, at the moment, Canada was going to show the flag to the world and didn't have a flag. And here we were trying to get a centennial symbol through the executive ranks of Parliament and our federal decision-making center, and at the same time the flag debate was on. You remember Mr. Diefenbaker held the debate up for the whole summer because he was wedded to the old symbol. So my answer is, it's almost clear on the face of it that symbols are extraordinarily important, and it's a very, very good place to start to bind people together.
Accentuate, and they're all excellent things we should consider. You say we have to make sure that we make this fun, but also allow for both dignity and emotion, and it's healthy to release the spirit through noise, through laughter, through tears, and through awe. And I think that's your last point that you make, and I think it brings some clarity to the direction you would like to see us push towards as we do our planning. And I'm a former elementary school principal, and anytime you really want to push something through with children, you have to make it fun, you have to make it engaging. Now, did you put every activity you were doing as a central committee through a lens that, is this going to be fun, is this going to be engaging? Was that something you used when you were evaluating what your plans were?
Not. That axiomatic, that anniversary axiomatique, which are my 10 precepts for a successful centennial or successful anniversary, were done after the facts, analyzing the programs that we had finished, taking what were the elements of those programs, and then saying, well, wait a minute, what did that mean? And out of those dropped those 10 precepts. So it came out after the fact, not before.
I believe, just from reading through them, I'm not going to go through all of them because there are time constraints, but I believe we could actually develop an instrument that we could use to evaluate activities we choose to do, events we choose to try to perpetuate, and we use an instrument to evaluate those to see if they meet some of that criteria, because that's criteria that were from the successful events we did last time. And I think if we ran it through that lens, we could probably have a pretty good tool to evaluate, and I think that might be a legacy your book provides us. So I want to thank you for that, and I think I'm going to push that forward as a recommendation.
Thank you. I think it'll live on. It's good.
Yeah. Mr. McLeod, you said something that has kind of inspired me, and I think that's something else we should talk about. You believe that the sesquicentennial should be an exercise in public imagination. And it goes back to what Mr. Jackson said about top-down and bottom-up. And I do agree with you. We have to have the ability to provide Canadians the opportunity to imagine what the sesquicentennial means to them and be able to develop their own events, their own infrastructure in their local communities, and be able to provide the resources necessary from a federal level so they can express this imagination. Do you have any suggestions so we don't make it top-down, how we can provide the resources, how we can provide the supports necessary without being, being too controlling of what happens at the bottom on the ground level?
I think you have some immediate assets at hand, and the first is the work that I've already mentioned by David McKenzie with PEI 2014. That's a great opportunity, and I know that there is a possibility of a federal government commitment and participation in that exercise. But what I tried to say today is I believe the federal government's role is really about convening, ultimately, right, and providing some of the connective tissue through the symbols and other iconography. So get started by looking to those groups who can convene Canadians today. Work with PEI 2014, work with the YMCAs of Canada. They had an enormous role in the staging and planning of the centennial. 52 associations clear across this country. Look to one of the important legacies, actually, of Canada 125, and that's the Trans-Canada Trail, which they'd very much like to complete and finish connecting in time for 2017. They've had the idea that we need a Trans-Canada Trail party and get Canadians out and hiking on that day. I think if you even just brainstorm amongst yourselves, you'll quickly be able to spot local civic associations, many of which have provincial and national connections, who could work with you to stage that conversation today. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. Work with our national broadcaster as well. I think they've got an important role to play here.
I have one more quick question. I'm really low on time, so I'm going to make it quick. Yeah. It's sort of in relation to what Mr. Sims was saying. We do have a lot of municipalities from smaller communities in the rural parts of this country that, if a program is a third, are going to have difficulty coming up with their thirds. The province and the federal government can allocate large budgets to this project, and they can meet their 2/3. My suggestion would be to have some sort of baseline that all communities get, all municipalities get, and on top of that, they could top up with local investment where they can engage a third. But I really do think if this is going to be an event that is promoted across the country, we have to provide every community, every group across the country with the ability to do something. So I think, Scott, a baseline funding for everyone, just so they could do something, and then if they have more resources available, they can engage a third program. I think that might be an answer to that. What's your feelings on that?
I don't have a technical view on the financing of 2017, but I would suggest that, listen, it's no surprise that government already has a very big footprint in this country. And one of the very simple things they did federally was to insist that the Centennial logo was printed on every check that got sent to Canadians in the year before. So in 1966 and 67, every veterans check, every benefit that the government sent out had that little logo on it. So, conduct a kind of search across government about all those contact points with Canadians and use those as channels to communicate this opportunity. Every time you step across a sidewalk that has one of those centennial symbols stamped into it, that should be a reminder to each of you to speed up, because we're getting there quickly, right?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Armstrong. Now we're moving into 5-minute rounds, so you have 5 minutes for the question and the answer, and we'll move to you, Mr. Nantel, first.
Thank you. First, I really want to appreciate your presence here, Mr. Croyd. Honestly, it's a very big privilege for us. I wanted to ask you, obviously in 1967, it was a very rich candid, optimistic era. And the last 45 years have brought many changes as far as national unity tensions and the economy also, which is not as clear as it was. If you were to be reassigned today on the 150th, how would you adapt to these changes?
I didn't understand the question.
If you were to be reassigned on the 150th anniversary now, would you make any changes in your approach, considering the changes Canada has been through in the last 45 years?
Oh, absolutely. It would be essential to do that and be prudent to any planner to make an assessment of that and come right up to date with their database and their opinions about trends. Absolutely. And that's some of the work that's going to come out of your committee will reflect that, for sure. I'd like to just say something that I have to mention, and that is what we call the private sector. Where was the private sector in the Centennial? Nowhere. Big corporations, Canada, nowhere. The only corporation that stepped up to bat was the Bank of Canada. No, excuse me, the Royal Bank, yeah. And they donated $50,000 every year to some worthy cause upon application, and it was considered a centennial gift. Nobody else, not one. Now, one has to pause and wonder why the sort of ethos and personality of the corporations of Canada were so reluctant to take part. Well, one of the answers was they went to Expo, because Expo had the showplace for them and had a structure for them, and so that the rest of the celebrations across the country that all Canadians were participating in were neglected. So it's something to think about. What part will the private sector play in the upcoming anniversary?
Thank you, Mr. Croy. My other question is for Mr. McLeod. In March 2010, you've met with many people to bring in ideas for the next celebrations. Were there any access teams that popped out overwhelmingly? Like, let's say, we're talking about en fait, je vais parler en français. You have your here, please? Yeah. Par exemple, l'assurance maladie.
For example, health insurance, which has made such a great difference to Canada. So this is a theme which was introduced. So are there other themes that have come out apart from this example of healthcare as a success following 1967? And what do you see for the future?
In the report that we published from the conference, they identified 7 or 8 principles that they thought should inform the design of 2017. The first is the idea that diversity is Canada's pride, it's part of our character and it's our strength, and 2017 should reflect that it's big ideas that ultimately contribute to a lasting legacy, that it should be an occasion to rekindle the sense of public imagination. This idea that I mentioned, that demography is destiny. You know, one point that I think, and this was discussed at length at the conference, is that, you know, in 1967, the novelty of becoming a multicultural country, bringing in more immigrants per capita than any other country in the world, a legacy that has continued, is no longer the whole story. We're also a country of immigrants. That is, in fact, 8% of our population lives abroad, and that's more per capita than any other country in the G8. So it's not just about Canadians of convenience, it's about young people pursuing education, travel opportunities, business people around the world. So in 2017, how do we make it a global celebration? How do we activate our embassies and our consulates to participate in this? They talked about it being a better, fairer society, and that ultimately the sesquicentennial needs to be shared by all.
And my last question to Mr. Jackson. I like a lot your idea of Canadians giving each other gifts. To me, this is an axis. We're talking about ways of doing this celebration and how it worked well in 150, thanks to Mr. Croyd's efforts and team. But tell me more about your concept of gifts.
Thank you. A gift could be as simple as moving your barbecue to the front lawn and inviting neighbors you've never met to a conference on the future of Confederation. I mean, one of the elements that fascinates me that might be very difficult for government to engage, but probably should, is what are our obligations? We speak frequently about our rights to vote, human rights and so forth, and they're to be celebrated, of course. But my understanding is that my obligations as a Canadian are to pay taxes and to serve on jury if called, and that's about it. Well, is that sufficient? Is there something more we could wrap around this notion of our obligations formally to each other? And to the point about corporate involvement and business involvement, my experience so far, of course, is very short, it's just a year old, is that there's a quick willingness to explore things, not only the contribution of finances and time, but question I'm getting from all kinds of businesses in Calgary is how do we involve our employees? Well, maybe it's that you buy some coffee, go to Tim's, buy some coffee, get some donuts, have a conversation about what we can do as a business for a centenary. And corporations, again, in Calgary and elsewhere, have remarkable networks nationally and internationally. And to Peter's point about how do we recognize our global nature. Well, Nexon has got business interests in the North Sea and the Middle East and many places. Those are networks we can activate.
And when you
You're out of time. But
I'm out of time.
Yeah. Okay. Next is Mr. Young.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, gentlemen, for coming here today and giving your time. It's very, very informative for us. I'm a little older than Mr. Brown and Mr. Armstrong, so I actually knew the song very well. Bobby Gimby, the Pied Piper, singing about Canada. It's very memorable for us, for my generation, my group anyway. I also wanted to thank Mr. Peter Ackroyd for his definition of patriotism. Very simple. This is my home, my native land. And I wanted to tell you, I'm sure that this anniversary axiomatique will be very helpful as a template or guide for this committee and for the government. So it must be nice to be called back. They still need you. They still need your advice. So I do want to ask you, though, Mr. Ackroyd, you commented that one suggestion you had for the 150th is to involve the private sector more. Do you have any other suggestions to make it more exciting at our 150th?
Too complicated and too extensive a question to be answered in any but just a very, very extensive omnibus way, and I'm not capable of doing that. There are lots of suggestions I noticed in the paper that was given to me by the clerk of your committee. That there's quite a few suggestions in there already for you to start on, and I think that's not a bad beginning. And I appreciate the work that was done putting that together. That's my best answer to that.
Okay, that's helpful as well. Thank you very much. One of the things that I'm interested in is using the 150th celebration and leading up to it. And we want this to be a celebration that leads up to 2017. It's telling Canadian stories. And, for example, I don't think very many Canadians know that Sir John Graves Simcoe, the first governor of Ontario, banned slavery in Upper Canada 60 years before the American Civil War, and not a shot was fired. And I'd love to see that story told in film or dance or opera or whatever. Peter, I wanted to ask you, Peter MacLeod, if you have any suggestions how to involve Canadians in the arts more in the celebrations.
Well, I think actually Colin, who is the head of the Confederation Arts Centre and the Epcor Centre for the Arts in Calgary, may have more suggestions about that.
I'm going to ask him as well.
All right, good. But I think the arts are so important because they convey the kind of vitality, right? And they are a place for experimentation and a place for public imagination. And it's not just, it's arts high and low. You look to Toronto, where we have the incredible Manifesto Urban Arts Festival that's happening every year. Again, it's not about creating everything new. It's about connecting with organizations and giving them a nudge right now, which doesn't mean necessarily funding. It means just saying, start thinking now. Get all of the arts associations to suggest to them that this year is a good time to bring it up at their AGM. right? And to come before this committee perhaps in the future to share with you their plans. You have tremendous convening power to ask any of these arts executives to do the homework that's required to think about how the arts can play a role.
And I suppose, do you have any thoughts on seed money or contests or anything like that?
Money that can be that can be put towards convening is really important. And it's maybe a broader point about the sesquicentennial. No one's asked about, well, how are we going to use Facebook and Twitter and technology to make this all great? And of course, that's going to play an important role. But let's not forget that in the centennial, the federal government funded the movements of hundreds of thousands of high school students on buses and trains across the country so they could simply see their country. And Canada hasn't gotten any smaller in the course of the past 40-odd years. We're going to need the federal government to continue, as William Thorsell has written, to help people mix up, move around, and see their country. We need that at the planning stage. We need that as part of the celebration.
I'd like to ask Mr. Jackson the same question. Ways to involve people in the arts telling Canadian stories.
To build on what Peter's saying, I believe very much in the government's convening ability, but also the challenging ability. I think funding, if necessary, but not necessarily funding. I think there is an obligation that can be promoted for those of us who benefit from being part of this nation to contribute to this nation, regardless of whether we're funded. And if we require and can make the case for public funding for this particular project, excellent. But we should be doing it anyway. And I would argue strongly to you that the first thought isn't seed funding. The first thought is articulating a challenge.
That's very helpful. Okay.
Mr. Young.
Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Benskin.
Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your presentation. I'm going to actually pick up on what Mr. Jackson was just saying in terms of what I might put forward as a recommendation that this government actually throw out that challenge. You know, the fact that these discussions are happening right now for 2017 is not very known, in the sense that, you know, the public itself is not aware that we're having these discussions. And I was struck by the the logos, the photos that you put out there, and the fact that these things were sort of, you know, this logo was sent out and said, hey, use this, right? So the idea still came from the people. But the connection, the connective tissue, as you said, was the identifying marker that this was a Canadian Centennial project. And also, what I'm hearing from this group that there seems to be a consensus that the success of this was the fact that it came from the individuals. Again, sort of scanning through this book, I saw the logo, and I was reminded of the high school program that they had for those of us who were of that period. That it was the forerunner to participation. You know, you had a series of exercises that you had to do and limits that you had to get to. You got a bronze patch or a silver patch or a gold patch. That was part of that as well, because it had the centennial symbol in there. So these type of programs, if I may, these are the type of programs that you're advocating as far as creating a groundswell of activity and participation of Canadians. Would that be a good assessment?
Very much. I think you're right on the money with that one. And, you know, sending out badges and things like this and Expo printing up its passports, how much did that really cost? Very, very little. And look what a mark it made in a generation of Canadians. Since I started following the Centennial beat, you wouldn't believe how many people have said, I think I still have my Expo passport somewhere. And they really prize it, you know? So, you know, right now, I don't think it's about getting all Canadians fired up about the sesquicentennial. They've got lots of other things to focus on for the next couple of years. But, boy, we're almost a little bit behind the game already when it comes to getting the associations. You know, is the Canadian Council of Chief Executives going to call all of its members together to have a conference about this in the next year? It probably should. Are the educators or the artists, are they going to come together in the next year to think about their plans? They probably should. And again, I think this committee can do a lot of good in putting that challenge, as Colin said, to them.
Thank you. I had another question. I forgot what it was. I'm tired. One of the things that struck me, though, was the simplicity and how do you think we in today's more apathetic era, 1967 was really looking forward. There was that sense of growth. These are the things that we're capable of doing as Canadians. You know, 50 years later, there's a little bit of malaise happening right now. What would you suggest in terms of possibilities of kind of getting people excited about the country again and getting people excited about who they are as Canadians? That's for any one of you.
The New Democratic Party and the Liberal Party both had strong leaders tomorrow.
We're working on that.
No.
My experience so far is that there's a great deal of dry tinder waiting to be ignited. The challenge issue, the challenge opportunity, the challenge possibility. I was speaking a couple of days ago with a friend who is a significant philanthropist and is going to make a major gift to a national institution, a truly major gift. And immediately went to the notion of, well, why don't I do that in the spirit of 150? The gifts will probably occur anyway, maybe the same quantum, but in the spirit of. Had the same conversation with some of the leadership in corporate Calgary, that they all have corporate responsibility groups, foundations, and make contributions to community projects and enterprises. How about branding those gifts for the next few years in the spirit of 150? So again, it can happen through existing channels, recognizing it can happen through very simple projects like making a cupcake and taking it to the lady next door.
We did some polling around the conference. I know Keith Newman was here, and he probably told you that among Francophones and Anglophones, it's actually allophones who are most excited to celebrate. I think we often talk a lot about civic apathy, and I'm in the public engagement game, but it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, this occasion is really what we decide to make it. If you look at this ad again, the headline is, it turned out to be the most fun we've had in years. Were you surprised? Well, most people didn't think the Centennial was going to be that much fun at all, and we amazed ourselves, just as we did recently with the Vancouver Olympics.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Benskin. Now, just a note to members, the lights flashing and the bells going means that we have votes. It's 30-minute bells, which technically means we would have to end our committee meeting now. With unanimous consent of the committee members, we could continue for 15 more minutes. Is there unanimous consent to continue for 15 more minutes? Okay. 5-minute round. Mr. Gill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses for your time and being here with us today. I know we're under pressure in terms of timing and stuff, and I'll try to keep my questions very short, and if I can get short answers, that would be great. My first question is for Mr. Ackroyd. We saw the Centennial symbol, and I am wondering if you can briefly describe sort of the process, how the symbol was chosen.
The question, how was the symbol chosen?
Yes.
We sent out letters to all the graphic designers in Canada who had experience in graphic design and asked them to submit in the standard form what they would consider to be an appropriate symbol for the Centennial. And that was unsuccessful because what they sent us, the Executive Committee of the Centennial Commission did not like any of them. And so we had to give them the prize money anyway, first, second, and third, because we had promised to give them some money. And so was in desperation that we went to a young graphic designer who worked for one of the printing houses in Toronto and asked him, could he design something for us quickly? And he designed something that everybody liked. It was really odd, really odd.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Next question, maybe for Mr. MacLeod. In the last 45 years, I guess Canada has changed or gone through a significant change process, mainly with the demographic change, a lot of new Canadians that will be participating in the 150th now. What sort of impact might that have, or what would you say that we need to keep in mind keeping the new Canadians or the new demographics in mind?
Well, one of the organizations that I think could be very helpful is the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, former Governor General's legacy, run by Gillian Hewitt-Smith. They've created
A cultural access program for all new Canadians so that they automatically get free admittance to the country's best art galleries, museums, and other cultural institutions. They're also responsible for the enhanced citizenship ceremony process, and they would be a good group to tap for some of their ideas. There's no question that demographics have changed this country dramatically, and again, I think that's why this isn't just an exercise in public engagement. That's only one half of the equation. It is as much an opportunity for public learning, right? There's a lot we don't know about ourselves, whether it's our contemporary reality or whether it's our history or what some of the choices facing this country over the course of the next generation really look like. So for all of those who are new to Canada, perhaps it makes that conversation only that much more relevant and pressing, and we have excellent institutions across this country that can help stage that conversation. But at least we know from the polling research, people are keen to have it.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Jackson now. First of all, I want to thank you for the wonderful work you are doing, or your organization, the project you guys are working on. And I'm wondering if you had any interest from other cities in sort of taking on what you're doing and maybe implementing in their own cities.
Thank you. We intend that what we do be offered freely to anybody else who wishes to pick up both the content, things like the symbol we've developed, and of course what we've learned about engaging people, the projects and so forth that are possible. So it's there to be had by anybody who wishes. There are sparks in different parts of the country. There's no organization as advanced as we are yet. We're not that advanced, but there's nobody else that advanced. So, for example, in London, Ontario, there's a group that I think is coming out of the Corps of Commissionaires who are developing a memorial project. There's those kinds of focused projects, but not yet broader umbrella groups.
That's great. Are you seeing a trend in the type of gifts or projects that Canadians are wishing for on your site?
Now, this probably reflects our own biases. A lot of what is coming back is ways of getting to know each other better, to Peter's point about discovering each other. Stories about origin, how we came to be in this country. Stories about what our shared dreams may become, ways of investigating those. Those are the kinds of tone and trend. Again, Mr. Gill, I'm not sure if that's who we are with our ears, what we're hearing, as opposed to what the community is saying. But we're hearing more that human learning connection than the physical projects at this point.
Mr. Gill, Ms. Boutine-Sweet.
Merci. Merci à vous trois aussi.
Thank you. I would like to thank our witnesses. Mr. MacLeod, in your presentation, you talked about who we are, where we are, where we're going. That's very interesting. And we also talked about symbols, which are very important, and also legacies, permanent legacies, Confederation parks, for example, and something even more interesting as a permanent legacy, you talked about housing, if I understood you correctly. Were you saying something about housing, affordable housing? Would you not feel that this is something very important in a society which has changed as has with poverty problems and disparity in wages?
Very important question. You know, the Centennial responded to some very real needs that this country had, and it was the Royal Bank that identified housing as one of them, and it wasn't a part of the Centennial program, but of course the 1970s was an era of substantial federal investment in public housing that created some really lasting and successful neighborhoods in major cities across this country. I don't have a strong position or counsel for you in this regard, except that this planning phase really needs to be based on a thorough and unvarnished view of where this country is at and what it needs. Not just because we want to be tough-minded about it, but because we want to connect to real Canadians and their everyday experience. And we want to be able to make this an occasion or event that really corresponds to their lives. And so the investigation of this committee, I think it's wholly appropriate that the investigation of this committee address many of the social phenomena or obstacles or challenges that Canadians are facing, and thinks about how an occasion like the Centennial isn't just a party, but is this opportunity for public imagination and public investment. But I also agree that the private sector needs to step up to the plate this time around and be part of the conversation too.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. I see you're nodding your head. I believe you are in agreement with this. I see you nodding your head, so I believe that you are also in agreement with this.
The opportunities I think that this marvelous event offers is that there are multiple sources of leadership in this nation, and that if government can behave in a way that it rises and lifts up those sources of leadership with the various points of focus, so people that are deeply concerned about social justice should, I think, be honored and recognized in the course of this. People that have other gifts to offer us. So again, really I'm just looping back on the earlier point that the government's opportunity to convene and to challenge, I think, is the greatest value, at least at this point in our journey.
You know, it should be a great relief to every member of this committee that you don't need to come up with the single big idea that's going to please everyone. I really think your job is to create a sense of urgency around this and to develop a framework that whether your thing is the arts, whether the thing is public education, whether your thing is housing, whether your thing is travel, that you recognize 2017 as an important moment to make your mark. And if you can come up with a framework that helps Canadians to do that and recognize that opportunity, you will have catalyzed a remarkable series of events for the country.
Merci. And finally, Mr. Hillier for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I actually only have one question, and it's for Mr. Jackson. You talked a little bit about what your group is doing and how, but could you help us, can you explain how your group came to be? Like who thought of it, how it got started, and maybe follow up with any recommendations on what we can do to help other such groups get kick-started?
Thank you so much. The origination of it was the conference which Peter MacLeod and IPAC presented a year and a half ago here. I was fortunate to be invited to come to that and got religion, got inspired. And was fortunate to have some friends who were also, as I am, retired and able to put some time into projects that might capture their hearts and interests. So the origins of it were here. And the execution is that there's a group, there's a sufficient number of people, again retired initially, but also younger folks, who are looking for a mission of this kind, something that is about bigger than ourselves. And how to stimulate elsewhere? I hope that what as we move through the winter and develop more content, that will be in itself an appropriate kind of inspiration to others, a challenge. We would be thrilled to be able to point to chapters, whether they're called I-150 or whatever, in different parts of the nation, and to learn from them and them from us. So we would be absolutely delighted if you know, Red Deer or Kapuskasing or whatever was further advanced than we are. We keep upping the game for each other. What can government do? Again, I think it's the challenge. You've heard my bias about being cautious with how quickly public money becomes part of the story. Yeah. And again, it's not a moral issue. It's a case of let's activate people's sense of citizenship, their sense of generosity to each other, and then reinforce that or expedite it with public money where necessary. So I'm not opposed to public money. It is not too early. It shouldn't be a bought party. It should be a potluck party.
Thank you. I will turn my time over to Mr. Calandra.
No, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. I just wanted to thank you guys all for coming. I do appreciate it, and thank you for the presents. We'll take a look at all of them, and I suspect we might have an opportunity to have you back as we start to develop this a little bit further. So thank you very much.
One final question. Can Mr. Ackroyd sign my book, please?
Okay, thank you to our panel. Very informative. We appreciate you being here. Mr. McLeod, Mr. Ackroyd, Mr. Jackson, a wonderful contribution to our study. Also be remiss if I didn't thank Mr. Dan Ackroyd for being here as well. I think we've all enjoyed him being here as well. And I see people are lined up to talk to him. So thank you all for being here.
Oh, Mr. Cash.
Oh, Mr. Cash.
I just want to make a point. We decided we were going to go to 10:30. It's not 10:30 yet. We've invited our guests, and I still had a question, and you've convened the meeting.
No, it is 10:30.
Well, I'm looking at the clock here on the room.
We don't
Sorry,
start
I was looking at this clock here. My apologies.